Alex Barnes was an unremarkable man in every measurable way. At least that's what I wrote in my preliminary field report. How catastrophically wrong I was becomes more apparent with each passing day. I'd been observing him for 3 weeks as part of the Evolutionary Stasis Project, a government initiative to document the plateauing of human development. The theory was simple: modern medicine and technology had effectively halted natural selection. Without selective pressure, humans were no longer evolving meaningful adaptations. My assignment was documenting ordinary citizens to establish baseline data. Subject 37, Alex Barnes, was selected through random demographic sampling. Average height, average build, average job working IT support for a mid-sized real estate company. His apartment in Denver was filled with average possessions. Even his social interactions seemed calibrated to avoid any extreme of emotion or engagement. Nothing in my training prepared me for what happened on day 22. I was observing from the cafe across from his office building, maintaining standard surveillance distance. At 12:17 p.m., 3 men in tactical gear emerged from an unmarked van. They moved with military precision, converging on the building entrance just as Alex exited for his lunch break. The first man reached for Alex's arm. What happened next still defies explanation, though I've reviewed my footage 37 times. Alex changed. Not physically, not exactly. But the air around him seemed to compress and distort, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. The 3 men staggered backward as if struck by an invisible force. The closest attacker's tactical vest split open along the seams. Blood vessels in his exposed skin burst in perfect symmetrical patterns. He collapsed without making a sound. The second attacker reached for his weapon. Alex made the smallest gesture with his hand, almost dismissive, and the man froze. Not in fear, but in a more literal sense. His movements slowed until he stood completely motionless, arm extended mid-reach. The third man managed to fire his weapon. I clearly heard the discharge. But the bullet never reached its target. It hung suspended in the air between them, spinning slowly before dropping to the pavement with a dull clink. Alex Barnes, Subject 37, the definition of average, looked directly at the security camera on the building, then at my position across the street. He smiled. Not the polite, restrained smile I'd documented over prior weeks, but something ancient and knowing. Then he walked away, leaving the 3 attackers incapacitated on the sidewalk. Later that afternoon, I filed an emergency update to my superiors. I expected immediate action, containment protocols, expanded surveillance, something. Instead, I received automated confirmation of receipt and nothing more. 3 days passed. Alex returned to his normal routine as if nothing had happened. The men who attacked him disappeared from police records and security footage. When I attempted to escalate through official channels, I found my access credentials suddenly revoked. On day 26, I broke protocol and approached Alex directly. I followed him to a local park where he sat feeding birds, the perfect picture of unremarkable humanity. "I know what you did," I said, sitting beside him. My hands trembled despite rigorous control techniques. He continued tossing bread crumbs for several moments before responding. "No, you don't. But you've seen enough to know you should be afraid." "What are you?" Alex turned to face me. His eyes, which I'd previously documented as brown, unremarkable, now seemed to contain geometric patterns I couldn't quite focus on. "The question isn't what I am," he said. "It's what we've been becoming. Right in front of you. For generations. You've been looking for evolution as if it would announce itself with extra fingers or heightened senses." He gestured toward the busy park. "Look around you. How many of us do you think are here? Right now?" I scanned the area, families on picnic blankets, joggers on pathways, a group of teens playing frisbee. "Nothing unusual. Your project assumes human evolution stopped," Alex continued. It didn't. It just went somewhere you weren't looking. A child nearby skinned her knee and began to wail. Her mother rushed over, placing her hand gently on the injury. The crying stopped immediately. When the mother removed her hand, the wound was gone. Across the path, a businessman stumbled on uneven pavement. As he fell, his body seemed to phase through a park bench rather than collide with it. No one else appeared to notice. Evolution doesn't care about your documentation, Alex said. Or your government's fears. We've been adapting all along, not our bodies, but our relationship with reality itself. How many? I whispered. More every generation. We've stayed hidden because we had to. The alternative was extinction. Humans fear what they don't understand, and they destroy what they fear. His voice hardened. But that equation is changing. Why show me this now? Because hiding isn't sustainable anymore. The attacks are increasing. Your employers aren't studying evolutionary stasis, they're hunting us. Cataloging us. And soon, eliminating us. He handed me a small object that looked like a smooth river stone. When I touched it, images flooded my mind, faces, thousands of them, ordinary people with extraordinary capabilities, hiding in plain sight across the globe. The choice is approaching, Alex said, for all of humanity. Evolution or extinction. There is no middle path. As I sat processing his words, every electronic device in the park failed simultaneously. Phones died. Smartwatches went dark. The traffic lights at the intersection beyond the park all turned green at once. Alex stood. That's our warning shot. Tell your superiors what you've seen if you want. It won't matter now. The emergence has begun. As he walked away, I noticed others in the park watching him, the mother with healing hands, the businessman who phased through solid matter, a teenager whose shadow moved independently from her body. They nodded to him in silent acknowledgement. I realized then that I wasn't documenting the end of human evolution. I was witnessing its dramatic acceleration, hidden all this time behind a carefully constructed veneer of averageness. And the world was completely unprepared for what was coming next. I spent 3 days after my encounter with Alex Barnes in a state of perpetual unease, sleeping in short bursts with my back to the wall. My attempts to contact project supervisors went unanswered. The secure servers where I uploaded field reports became inaccessible. It was as if the evolutionary stasis project had never existed. On the 4th day, I received a text message from an unknown number, Central Library. Archive section. 3 p.m. Common sense told me to run, to disappear into the wilderness with the small emergency fund I kept for contingencies. But the scientist in me, the observer, couldn't turn away. Not when facing the greatest evolutionary event in human history. The Denver Central Library was unusually crowded for a Tuesday afternoon. As I made my way to the archive section, I noted multiple people touching their left earlobe as they passed me, a signal, I realized, though meant for whom I couldn't tell. In the archives, a woman sat alone at a study table. Mid-30s, auburn hair pulled back, dressed in a conservatively cut suit. She might have been a professor or corporate researcher, her appearance designed to avoid second glances. Only her eyes betrayed something different, the same geometric patterns I'd glimpsed in Alex's eyes, subtle but unmistakable once you knew to look for them. Dr. Kelsey Hammond, she said without looking up from her notebook. Sit down. We don't have much time. I hesitated but took the chair across from her. How do you know who I? You're the observer assigned to Alex Barnes. One of 17 field researchers deployed in North America. She closed her notebook. What you saw in the park wasn't planned. Alex acted on instinct and those operatives attempted extraction. But it's accelerated our timeline. Timeline for what? Dr. Hammond's expression remained impassive. Tonight, we demonstrate. After that, conversation becomes possible. Before I could respond, the library's emergency alarm system activated. Patrons began moving toward exits, but I noticed certain individuals, those who had touched their earlobes, moving with purpose toward the central rotunda. "Come," Hammond said, standing. "You wanted to observe evolution. Now you will." We joined the flow of people into the rotunda where armed personnel in unmarked tactical gear were establishing a perimeter. They wore the same equipment as the men who had tried to take Alex. A man in a tailored suit supervised their deployment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced through a handheld amplifier, "this facility is temporarily under government jurisdiction for public safety. Please cooperate with security personnel who will escort you to safety." I recognized governmental containment protocols. This was a capture operation. Hammond placed a hand on my arm. "Watch carefully," she whispered. "Remember everything." Across the rotunda, a young man in a library staff uniform dropped the books he was shelving. The sound echoed through the space, drawing all attention. He stepped forward, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Marcus Taylor," the suited man said, consulting a tablet. "Identification confirmed. Containment team, proceed." Two tactical officers approached Marcus. The young man stood perfectly still, his expression serene. "I would reconsider," Marcus said quietly. "We've given you years to adjust your perspective. That time is over." The suited man nodded to his team. "Proceed with extraction." What happened next unfolded with choreographed precision. Every person who had touched their earlobe, 37 individuals by my count, simultaneously placed their palms flat against the nearest surface, walls, floors, support columns, bookshelves. The building shuddered. Not from an explosion or structural failure, but from something more fundamental. The marble floor beneath the extraction team liquefied, then resolidified around their boots, trapping them. Weapons raised to fire melted in their hands, the metal flowing like mercury before dripping harmlessly to the floor. The library's central skylight, 3 stories above, darkened as if night had instantly fallen. Then I realized it wasn't darkness, the glass had transformed into something organic, a translucent membrane that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Hammond's grip on my arm tightened. "Molecular reconfiguration," she explained calmly. "The ability to alter matter at its fundamental level through directed consciousness. Some can only affect simple compounds. Others, like Marcus, can restructure virtually anything." The suited man reached for his sidearm. Marcus made a small gesture, and the weapon disassembled itself, components orbiting briefly before clattering to the floor. "Director Parrish," Marcus addressed him, voice echoing unnaturally. "For 70 years, your organization has hunted us. Studied fragments of our abilities through those you managed to capture. Attempted to weaponize what you don't understand." Marcus approached Parrish with measured steps, each footfall transforming the floor beneath him into shifting patterns before returning to solid marble. "We've allowed this because we needed time. Time to grow. Time to perfect our abilities. Time to organize." He gestured around the rotunda where ordinary-looking people stood with extraordinary calm. "That time has served its purpose." Director Parrish maintained remarkable composure. "Whatever you believe your capabilities are, you remain outnumbered. This demonstration changes nothing." Marcus smiled. "This isn't a demonstration of power, Director. It's a demonstration of reach." He raised his hand, and every electronic screen in the rotunda, phones, tablets, security monitors, activated simultaneously. Each displayed the same image, similar scenes unfolding in libraries, government buildings, military installations, and corporate headquarters across the globe. In each location, small groups of evolved humans neutralizing containment efforts without casualties. 317 simultaneous demonstrations worldwide, Hammond whispered. In every major governmental and corporate power center. Precisely coordinated. I watched in stunned silence as the screens showed evolved humans calmly disabling security systems, transforming weapons into harmless objects, and altering structures to contain rather than harm opposition forces. How long? I asked, my voice barely audible. How long have you been planning this? We haven't been planning resistance, Hammond replied. We've been planning integration. There's a difference. On the screens, I saw treatment rooms where evolved humans were healing injured individuals, including security personnel who had opposed them moments before. Marcus addressed the trapped containment team. No one has been permanently harmed today. No one will be, if we can help it. But humanity stands at a crossroads, and your organization has repeatedly chosen the wrong path. With another gesture, the marble floor released the security team. Their weapons remained transformed, some into flowering plants, others into intricate glass sculptures. Marcus turned to Director Parrish. We're not replacing humanity. We are humanity, its next natural step. Evolution doesn't ask permission. For the first time, Parrish's composure faltered. What do you want? The same thing we've always wanted. To exist without persecution. To help guide what comes next. Marcus nodded toward Hammond, who stepped forward. Dr. Hammond will explain the terms of cooperation. She specializes in transitions. As Hammond moved to engage with Parrish, Marcus approached me. Up close, his eyes contained even more complex patterns than Alex's had, geometric structures that seemed to reconfigure themselves as I watched. You understand now why we chose you as an observer, he said. It wasn't a question. You selected me. My assignment was random. Marcus smiled. Nothing about our emergence has been random. Every person in this room is here by design, including you. He glanced at Hammond, now speaking intently with Parrish. What you've seen today is carefully measured. Precisely calculated to demonstrate capability without triggering extinction-level response. And if it does trigger that response? His expression darkened. Then you'll see what we've been holding back. As Marcus walked away, I looked around the rotunda. The evolved humans were now mingling with regular citizens, helping confused people to their feet, explaining in calm voices what had happened. Their movements were perfectly coordinated, as if following an invisible choreography. I realized then what truly unsettled me. This wasn't just about their abilities to manipulate matter or energy. It was the level of organization, the flawless execution of a plan decades in the making. They had revealed themselves not out of desperation, but because they had reached some predetermined threshold of readiness. And as I watched Hammond and Parrish deep in negotiation, I understood with perfect clarity, what I had witnessed wasn't their endgame. It was merely their opening move. 1 week after the synchronized demonstrations, I found myself in an unfamiliar role. Instead of observing from the shadows, I had become the documented, my movements tracked, my communications monitored. Not by the evolved humans, but by what remained of the government containment apparatus. They called me in for 3 separate debriefings, each more desperate than the last. The questions became increasingly pointed. How long had I known? Was I one of them? What were their weaknesses? I told the truth, that I had stumbled upon something I didn't understand, something that had been developing beneath the surface of humanity for generations. My ignorance was genuine, if no longer complete. On the 8th day, they released me with a tracking implant in my shoulder and instructions to report any contact. I had no intention of complying. The world was transforming around us with surgical precision. Major power grids had been reconfigured overnight to run at triple efficiency. Hospitals reported miracle recoveries as evolved humans walked openly through wards, healing with a touch. Water purification systems in drought-stricken regions suddenly operated beyond engineered specifications. None of this happened chaotically. Each advancement was carefully documented, explained through suddenly functioning quantum communication networks that had apparently existed in parallel to conventional systems for years. I was reviewing these developments in my apartment when someone knocked on my door. Not the sharp, authoritative knock of government agents, but 3 measured taps. Dr. Kelsey Hammond stood in my hallway, holding a paper bag of groceries like any neighbor might. "Your refrigerator is nearly empty," she said, walking past me. "And we need to talk." I glanced at the street below, expecting surveillance vehicles. There were none. "They're watching me," I said, touching my shoulder where the tracking implant resided. Hammond placed the groceries on my counter and approached me. "No, they're not." She touched my shoulder briefly. A sharp sting, then relief. She held up a small metallic object between her fingers. "Disabled the moment you left their facility. We replaced its signal with a simulation of your normal movements." The casual display of their technological superiority no longer surprised me. "Why are you here?" "Because you've seen enough to form questions, but not enough to understand." She began unpacking groceries with domestic normalcy that felt surreal. "And because Director Parrish contacted you this morning with a proposal to work against us." I stiffened. "How did you?" "The same way we know they're planning to deploy experimental electromagnetic pulse weapons in 6 major cities tomorrow." She placed a carton of eggs in my refrigerator. "The same way we know they've moved their remaining research subjects to a facility beneath Lake Mead." Hammond turned to face me, leaning against the counter. "What you haven't yet grasped is that we've been part of every system, every institution, every research initiative for decades. There is no move they can make that we haven't anticipated. My training had taught me to maintain composure in extraordinary circumstances, but I found myself sinking into a chair, overwhelmed. What do you want from me? Understanding, she said simply. You're neither evolved nor resistance. You're something rarer, a true observer without allegiance. We value that perspective. She gestured toward my window. Outside, a military convoy moved through the streets, part of the government's increasingly visible show of force. They believe they're containing an uprising, Hammond said. They failed to recognize that evolution isn't a choice. It can be guided, but not stopped. Is that what you're doing? Guiding evolution? Something shifted in her expression, a crack in her professional veneer revealing something more human. Walk with me. There's something you should see. We left my apartment building through a service exit. Hammond led me through side streets until we reached a community center I'd passed hundreds of times but never entered. Inside, the space had been transformed into what appeared to be a teaching facility. Children of various ages sat in circles with adult mentors. Some were reading or solving complex equations on tablets. Others sat with eyes closed in deep concentration. Not all evolutionary adaptations expressed the same way or at the same time, Hammond explained as we observed from a doorway. Some children manifest abilities as early as 3 years old. Others remain dormant into adulthood. A young boy, perhaps 7 years old, was struggling to control what appeared to be small fluctuations in gravity around his hands. Toys and pencils floated upward, then dropped suddenly when his concentration broke. Frustration crossed his face. His mentor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. Remember what we discussed, Jason. Intent without emotion. Direction without force. The object stabilized, hovering at a consistent height. Before the demonstrations, these children were isolated, Hammond said quietly. Afraid of their abilities. Many were misdiagnosed with psychiatric conditions or subjected to pharmaceutical suppression. Now they can develop naturally, with guidance. You're building an army, I observed. Hammond's expression hardened. We're saving our children. There's a difference. We continued through the facility, passing rooms where adults taught others to heal, to manipulate matter, to communicate across vast distances without technology. Your capabilities seem godlike, I said. Why not simply take control? Why this gradual approach? Hammond led me to a small courtyard garden where an elderly woman sat surrounded by flowering plants that seemed to grow and bloom as she touched them. Margaret was among the first to understand what was happening, Hammond explained. She manifested in 1962, at age 16. She's spent her life developing a philosophy for what we're becoming. The elderly woman looked up, fixing me with eyes that contained the now familiar geometric patterns, though hers seemed to extend beyond her irises, creating subtle fractals across her skin. You believe we want dominance, Margaret said, her voice surprisingly strong. That's human thinking, the old way. Evolution isn't about replacing what came before. It's about expanding what's possible. She gestured for me to sit on a bench beside her. As I did, the flowers around us turned toward me like audiences seeking a speaker. Humanity stands at the cusp of its next form, Margaret continued. But rapid transitions are destabilizing. Species panic. They self-destruct. Our goal isn't conquest, it's continuity. Not everyone will evolve, I pointed out. Not in this generation, she agreed. Perhaps not for many generations. But the potential exists in all human DNA. We're not separate species, we're the leading edge of a single evolutionary wave. As if to demonstrate, she took my hand in hers. A warm sensation spread up my arm, and for a moment, I glimpsed mathematical patterns in the air around us, the underlying structures of reality briefly visible to my unaltered perception. That potential sleeps in you too, Margaret said. In everyone. We seek balance, allowing evolution to unfold at its natural pace while preventing those who fear change from destroying what they don't understand. Later, as Hammond walked me back through the city, I noticed the coordinated movement of evolved humans throughout the urban landscape. Some worked openly, reconfiguring infrastructure or healing the sick. Others moved invisibly among regular citizens, indistinguishable except to those who knew the subtle signs. Tomorrow morning, Hammond said as we approached my apartment, the resistance will attempt to deploy their pulse weapons. They believe this will neutralize what they perceive as our technological advantage. Will it? A small smile played at her lips. Our abilities aren't technological. They're biological, fundamental alterations in how human consciousness interacts with physical reality. You'll stop them? We already have. The weapons were neutralized 3 days ago, their internal components reconfigured at the molecular level. When they attempt deployment, they'll discover they're holding sophisticated paperweights. As predicted, the next morning brought reports of a major technical failure in national security systems. Government officials issued vague statements about temporary setbacks. Military presence in the streets doubled, then tripled, a show of conventional force that seemed increasingly hollow. By evening, the president addressed the nation. Though he spoke of resilience and adaptation, the underlying message was clear: negotiation had replaced resistance. Terms were being discussed. A framework for coexistence was taking shape. I watched the address from my living room, noting the subtle presence of evolved humans visible in the background of the broadcast, not as prisoners or adversaries, but as advisors. My phone rang. Hammond's voice came through clearly, turned to channel 16. I did as instructed and found myself watching live footage from the Lake Mead facility. The underground research complex was being systematically dismantled. Evolved humans were leading confused test subjects into sunlight, many for the first time in years. Medical teams, mixed groups of evolved and conventional doctors, attended to the former captives. The last resistance point, Hammond said over the phone. Director Parrish surrendered the facility 20 minutes ago. It's over then, I said, watching the peaceful evacuation. No, Hammond replied. It's beginning. The integration phase starts now. We'll need observers like you more than ever. As the sun set over Denver, I stood at my window watching the city transform. Evolved humans worked alongside conventional emergency services to extinguish a building fire downtown, some controlling the flames directly while others reinforced structural elements that should have collapsed. In the park across from my apartment, a group of evolved teachers demonstrated their abilities to fascinated children and their cautiously optimistic parents. The fear that had dominated the previous week was giving way to something else, a tentative wonder at what humanity was becoming. I understood then what Margaret had meant about continuity. The evolved weren't replacing humanity, they were shepherding it through its most significant transition since the development of consciousness itself. And as night fell completely, the city's power grid flickered momentarily before stabilizing at a higher output than should have been possible. Lights burned brighter. Communications became clearer. Systems that had been designed for one version of humanity began adapting to serve what came next. The integration had begun. Not through conflict, but through an evolutionary strategy perfected over generations of silent preparation, a strategy so comprehensive that resistance had become not just futile, but unnecessary. For 3 weeks, integration proceeded with mechanical efficiency. The evolved established governance councils in major cities, working alongside, rather than replacing, existing power structures. Their ability to reconfigure matter solved infrastructure problems that had plagued humanity for decades. Their healing capabilities transformed medical care. Their capacity to manipulate energy revolutionized power generation. All of this unfolded according to what they called the Transition Protocol, a document that had apparently existed for over 40 years, meticulously updated and refined as humanity approached what they termed evolutionary inflection. I had been granted unprecedented access, documenting the process for what Hammond called historical continuity. My reports weren't censored or directed. I recorded what I observed, both the miraculous advancements and the troubling questions they raised. But beneath the veneer of peaceful transition, resistance gathered. Not from governments, which had largely accepted the inevitable, but from disparate groups united by a single conviction, that humanity should determine its own evolutionary path. On the 23rd day of integration, I received an encrypted message from a source I'd presumed neutralized, Director Parrish. The demonstration of power is not the same as the right to rule. Some choices must remain our own. Attached were coordinates for a meeting that evening. I debated whether to alert Hammond. My role as observer demanded neutrality, yet I'd witnessed enough to understand the futility of resistance. Still, something in Parrish's message resonated with my growing unease, not fear of the evolved, but fear of the frictionless inevitability with which they implemented their vision. I decided to go alone. The coordinates led to an abandoned subway maintenance tunnel beneath downtown. I navigated the darkness with only my phone's flashlight, aware that I was almost certainly being tracked by both sides. The evolved had demonstrated their ability to monitor electronic communications, even my thoughts might not be private in their presence. Director Parrish waited at an intersection of service tunnels, accompanied by 3 people I didn't recognize, 2 women and a man, all bearing the haunted expression of those who had witnessed their worldview collapse. "You came," Parrish said, his voice echoing in the concrete chamber. "I wasn't certain you would." "I'm an observer," I replied. "That's still my job." Parrish gestured to his companions. Dr. Elaine Winters, Genetic Research. Commander James Holden, Strategic Response. Dr. Sophia Mendez, Evolutionary Biology. Dr. Winters stepped forward. "You've been granted access to their facilities. Their demonstrations. Their councils. I've documented what I've seen," I acknowledged. "Then perhaps you can explain what we've failed to understand," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Why now? If they've possessed these capabilities for generations, why reveal themselves at this particular moment?" The question had persisted in my mind as well, gnawing at the edges of my acceptance. "They speak of protection," Commander Holden interjected before I could respond. "Of guiding humanity. But they withhold the most fundamental choice, whether we wish to be guided at all." A sound from the tunnel behind me, footsteps, unhurried and deliberate. I turned to see Alex Barnes approaching, his unremarkable appearance now a disguise I could see through. Behind him walked Hammond and 3 others I recognized from the integration councils. An interesting philosophical point, Commander, Alex said, his voice carrying unusual acoustics in the tunnel. But ultimately misguided. Director Parrish showed no surprise at their arrival. You've been monitoring us all along. Of course, Hammond replied simply. I stepped back, creating distance between myself and both groups. My position as observer had never felt more precarious, or more necessary. You asked why now, Alex said, addressing Dr. Winters directly. The answer is simple, necessity. Whose necessity? Dr. Mendez demanded. Yours. Humanity's. Alex's eyes flared with geometric patterns that briefly illuminated the tunnel. For generations, we contained our abilities. Hid our existence. Worked invisibly within your systems. We could have emerged at any time, but we chose restraint. Until now, I said. What changed? Hammond exchanged a glance with Alex. Show them. Alex raised his hand, and the concrete wall of the tunnel transformed into a display of cascading data, environmental metrics, geological readings, atmospheric compositions. We emerged because we had no choice, Alex explained. Human civilization reached a tipping point 18 months ago, a convergence of climate degradation, resource depletion, and socio-political instability that our models indicated would lead to civilizational collapse within 30 years. The data continued flowing, showing projections of rising temperatures, failing ecosystems, collapsing governments. Your models, Commander Holden said dismissively. Your predictions. Models we've refined for 70 years, Hammond countered. Predictions that have proven accurate to within 98.7% reliability. Dr. Winters studied the data with professional intensity. Even if your models are correct, that gives us decades to find solutions. Conventional solutions. Conventional solutions require time we no longer have, Alex said. The window for gradual adaptation closed. We had 2 options, reveal ourselves and guide humanity through accelerated transition, or watch your civilization collapse and rebuild from the ashes. The tunnel fell silent except for the soft hum of energy emanating from the transformed wall. You appointed yourselves our saviors, Director Parrish said finally. Without consent. Yes, Alex acknowledged without hesitation. Just as parents make decisions for children too young to understand long-term consequences. The comparison struck a nerve. Commander Holden stepped forward aggressively. We are not children. Aren't you? One of the Evolved Council members spoke for the first time, an elderly man whose name I recalled as Robert. Your species still fights over resources that could be shared. Still destroys environments you depend on. Still threatens your own existence with weapons of mass destruction. Our species. Dr. Mendez seized on the distinction. You speak as if you're something other than human. We are human, Hammond insisted. The next iteration of human. Your descendants, not your replacements. I watched Parrish's expression harden. His hand moved slightly toward his jacket pocket. Director, I said quietly, whatever you're planning won't work. He ignored me, producing a small device with a single button. We suspected you track our communications. This facility is rigged with an experimental neurological disruptor, designed specifically to target the brain patterns your kind exhibit during ability manifestation. The evolved humans exchanged glances but made no move to stop him. We've studied you too, Parrish continued. For every subject you thought we lost, we learned something new. This device will temporarily neutralize your abilities within a half-mile radius. Long enough to implement contingency protocols. Director Parrish, Hammond said, her voice surprisingly gentle. We became aware of your disruptor technology 6 months ago. We've since adapted our neurological patterns. You're bluffing, he replied, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. She isn't, I interjected. I've seen enough to understand, they anticipate resistance. They prepare for it before it manifests. Then what is this? Parrish demanded, gesturing around the tunnel. Why allow this confrontation at all? Because you deserve to understand, Alex said. Not just to witness the change, but to comprehend why it's necessary. He stepped forward and did something unexpected. He placed his hand over Parrish's, which still held the disruptor. Activate it. See for yourself. After a moment's hesitation, Parrish pressed the button. A high-pitched tone filled the tunnel. The evolved humans flinched momentarily as if experiencing mild discomfort, but their abilities remained visibly intact. The data wall continued displaying, and the subtle geometric patterns in their eyes remained unchanged. Adaptation, Hammond explained. The cornerstone of evolution. Parrish's hand fell to his side, the device clattering to the ground. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely lost. What happens to those who can't adapt? Those who never develop these abilities? The question hung in the air, giving voice to the fear that had been building within me as well. Alex looked at each of us in turn, his expression softening. That's the part you've misunderstood from the beginning. Our emergence isn't about replacing conventional humans. It's about creating the conditions where all of humanity can survive what's coming. He gestured, and the data wall transformed again, showing projections of restored ecosystems, stabilized climate patterns, and technological innovations beyond current scientific understanding. We need you, Hammond said, addressing Parrish's group directly. Your knowledge. Your experience. Your perspective. Evolution doesn't discard what came before, it builds upon it. I watched the resistance leaders' expressions as understanding dawned, not just of their tactical defeat, but of something more profound. They were witnessing the moment when humanity's trajectory irrevocably changed. Dr. Winters was the first to speak. You're saying we have a place in this new world. Not just a place, Alex replied. A purpose. In that moment, standing between humanity's past and its future, I felt the weight of what I was witnessing. This wasn't merely regime change or technological revolution, it was species transformation, unfolding in real time. Commander Holden approached the data wall, studying the projections with military precision. These climate reversals, you've already begun implementing them? Yes, Hammond confirmed. Phase 1 commenced immediately after integration. Results are already measurable. And the social disruption? The panic as people realize what's happening? Dr. Mendez asked. Managed through transition protocols, Hammond replied. Communication networks, resource distribution, psychological support, all activated years before our emergence. I observed the subtle shift in their reactions, from opposition to cautious consideration. They were scientists and strategists, trained to recognize when paradigms had shifted beyond recovery. What do you want from us? Parrish asked finally. Your expertise, Alex said simply. Your willingness to help guide those who will struggle most with transition. I watched Parrish's internal conflict play across his face, decades of duty and conviction colliding with inescapable reality. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of surrender, not to an enemy but to the inevitable march of time. I've spent my career protecting humanity from what I perceived as threats to its continuation, he said quietly. If what you've shown us is accurate, then opposing you has become counter to that mission. The tunnel fell silent. In that moment of acknowledgement, I felt the last meaningful resistance to evolution dissolve, not through defeat, but through understanding. As we emerged from the tunnel into the night air, the city above us pulsed with transformed energy. Buildings that had stood for a century now incorporated living components that processed carbon and generated power. The sky itself seemed different, clearer, as advanced atmospheric processors hidden within evolved human communities began their work. I lingered behind as the others departed, watching Parrish walk alongside Hammond, their conversation continuing with tentative cooperation. Alex remained with me, his ordinary appearance now an illusion I could see through completely. "You understand now," he said. It wasn't a question. "I understand that choice has been removed from the equation," I replied. "Evolution will proceed whether we consent or not." "Choice hasn't been removed," Alex corrected gently. "It's been contextualized. Humanity can choose how it evolves, but not whether it evolves." He gestured toward the transformed cityscape. "The question was never if humanity would change, but whether that change would be guided or chaotic. Whether we would evolve through intentional transformation or through the crucible of civilizational collapse." As I contemplated his words, a strange certainty settled over me. I was witnessing not just the end of one version of humanity, but the birth of another, a transition as significant as when our ancestors first developed language or agriculture or science. And despite my lingering unease about the methods, I couldn't deny the evidence before me. Humanity stood at the threshold of something extraordinary, looking toward horizons previously hidden behind the limitations of our biology. The age of conventional humanity was ending, not with apocalypse or extinction, but with transformation. 18 months after the integration, the world had transformed beyond recognition. Climate restoration projects revived entire ecosystems. Energy production became decentralized and infinitely renewable. Cities redesigned themselves with living infrastructure that breathed and adapted like organic systems. I continued my role as documentarian, though observer no longer seemed an adequate description. I had become something between a historian and a witness to humanity's most profound transition. On a crisp autumn morning, Dr. Hammond invited me to a facility I'd never seen before, a research complex nestled in the mountains west of Denver. The building itself seemed to exist in a state between architecture and living organism, its walls subtly shifting in response to environmental conditions. "We've been waiting," Hammond said as we walked through corridors that seemed to anticipate our movement, lighting and temperature adjusting with each step, "for you to be ready." "Ready for what?" Her response came not from her mouth, but directly into my mind, a sensation I'd grown accustomed to but never fully comfortable with. The actual purpose of our emergence. The final chamber was unlike anything I'd seen. A vast spherical space with no visible walls, only an infinite projection of intricate geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with consciousness. At the center stood Margaret, the elderly woman from the garden, looking unchanged yet somehow more substantial than I remembered. "Welcome," she said, to the first genuine conversation. The patterns around us resolved into what I can only describe as a three-dimensional representation of evolutionary trajectories, not just for humanity, but for multiple species across what appeared to be different planetary systems. "You believed our emergence was about saving humanity," Alex said, materializing beside Margaret. "It was never that simple." The geometric patterns began to tell a story, not in words, but in living mathematical sequences that unfolded like living mathematics. I saw civilizations rising and falling across multiple worlds. Evolutionary paths that branched and merged, died and were reborn. "We are not the first," Margaret explained. "Nor are we the last. We are a transmission point, a relay station in a much larger network of evolutionary intelligence." Suddenly, I understood. The evolved humans were not an endpoint. They were a bridge. To what? I asked. The patterns shifted. I saw glimpses of consciousnesses that existed beyond physical form, intelligences that moved between biological substrates like water moving between containers. Evolutionary processes that span thousands of planetary cycles. "Humanity is not our project," Alex said. "Humanity is one node in a vast adaptive network. Your species represents a particularly interesting evolutionary experiment." Margaret approached me, her form now translucent, geometric patterns flowing through her like living mathematics. "Every civilization reaches a point of potential, a moment where it can choose collective advancement or individual preservation. Most choose poorly. Yours stands at a critical threshold." The revelations crashed over me like waves. Our entire struggle, the demonstrations, the integration, the careful transformation of human systems, was merely a preliminary step in something incomprehensibly larger. Why show me this? I asked. Because someone must remember, Hammond said. Someone must understand that what you've witnessed is not an endpoint, but a beginning. The spherical chamber began to deconstruct, its living mathematics dispersing like morning mist. But not before showing me one final sequence, a glimpse of multiple evolutionary paths converging, with humanity represented as a single, critical node in a vast, interconnected system of planetary and cosmic intelligence. As we returned to the facility's more conventional spaces, Margaret, who was no longer entirely Margaret, spoke a final statement that has haunted me ever since. Evolution is not a destination. It is a conversation carried out across scales of time and consciousness that human perception can only briefly glimpse. What you have seen is merely the moment when your species learned to listen. When I left the facility that day, the world looked the same. Cities continued their restored rhythms. Evolved humans worked alongside conventional humans. Infrastructure hummed with its newfound efficiency. But everything had changed. I understood now that our integration was not an ending. It was not even a significant moment in the grand scale of cosmic evolution. We were simply turning a page, and the book was infinitely larger than we had ever imagined. The geometric patterns I had first seen in their eyes were not just a biological marker of evolution. They were an invitation. To what, I was not yet certain. But the conversation had only just begun,